Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The special counsel tasked with investigating ties between Donald Trump's campaign and Russia's government during last year's election is examining a broad range of transactions involving Trump's businesses as well as those of his associates. That's according to Bloomberg News, which reported Thursday former FBI Chief Robert Mueller's probe will examine a series of real estate deals with Russian investors, as well as the 2013 Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. The probe has also reportedly absorbed a money laundering investigation into Trump's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort. News of the special counsel's wider investigation came after President Trump left open the possibility he could order the Justice Department to fire Mueller. Trump told the New York Times Mueller would be crossing a red line if he investigates Trump family finances. The Times reports Trump's lawyers and aides are working to dig up dirt on Mueller and his team in an effort to discredit the investigation. Meanwhile, the Washington Post reports Trump was especially upset after learning Mueller would have access to years' worth of Trump's tax returns, which the president has refused to make public. The Washington Post says Trump is also considering future pardons for his family and possibly even himself. This all comes amidst a shakeup of the legal team representing President Trump. Mark Kasowitz will no longer serve as Trump's lead personal attorney. The move follows an expletive-laden series of threats Kasowitz sent by email to a stranger who said he should resign. In Iraq, newly revealed intelligence reports claim more than 40,000 civilians died in the U.S.-led battle to retake Mosul from ISIS, a total far higher than previously reported. Writing for The Independent, Patrick Coburn cited intelligence reports seen by a top Kurdish official who said previous estimates of the deaths were low because thousands of bodies remain buried in the rubble. The battle, which wrapped up earlier this month, began last October and lasted months longer than the siege of Stalingrad during World War II. Back in the U.S., civil rights groups are warning a pair of bipartisan bills would criminalize free speech and peaceful protests. The Israel Anti-Boycott Act would make it a felony for U.S. citizens to support boycotts of Israel and Israeli settlements, punishable by at least a $250,000 fine with a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison and a fine of $1 million. So far, 43 senators and 234 Congress members on both sides of the aisle support the legislation. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, reportedly helped craft the bill and has made its passage one of the group's top lobbying priorities for the year. In a letter on Monday, the American Civil Liberties Union wrote, quote, "We take no position for or against the effort to boycott Israel or any foreign country, for that matter. However, we do assert that the government cannot, consistent with the First Amendment, punish U.S. persons based solely on their expressed political beliefs," unquote. The attempt to criminalize the BDS movement comes amidst a deepening humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip, where the United Nations said this month conditions have become unlivable. The Senate Judiciary Committee voted 20-0 Thursday to recommend President Trump's nominee replace James Comey as head of the FBI, clearing the way for Christopher Wray to be approved by the full Senate. Wray served as Assistant Attorney General under George W. Bush from 2003 to 2005, at a time when the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel signed off on the torture of prisoners in CIA and military custody. The Justice Department said this week it will allow state and local police departments to seize cash and property from people suspected of crimes, even if they haven't been convicted. Attorney General Jeff Sessions says the policy, called civil asset forfeiture, is an important tool for fighting crime. The practice was largely ended by the Obama administration after investigation showed local police routinely stop drivers for minor traffic infractions and seize billions of dollars worth of property. In some cases, departments use the assets to pay for luxury cars and high-powered weapons. The ACLU has called civil asset forfeiture a violation of due process that disproportionately targets communities of color. On Capitol Hill, a pair of senators introduced a bill Thursday seeking to reform states' money bail systems, which leave nearly 500,000 Americans in jail each day simply because they're unable to pay their way out. The legislation by Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky and Democrat Kamala Harris of California would prod states to move away from the current money bail system and towards a system that allows lower-income people to go free as they await trial. Meanwhile, in New York City, civil rights activists are demanding justice for a Bronx teenager who's been held at the notorious Rikers Island jail while awaiting trial for a 2015 crime he says he did not commit. Prosecutors say 18-year-old Pedro Hernandez fired a shot that struck another teen in the leg, even though the victim and 8 other teens who witnessed the shooting say Hernandez is innocent. Hernandez has turned down a plea deal that would see him released on 5 years probation. He's insisting on a trial by jury, but scheduling conflicts have pushed a trial date past Labor Day. Hernandez hopes to be released by September 1st in order to accept a full college scholarship. His family's launched a crowdfunding campaign to raise the $250,000 needed to bail him out. Hernandez's plight has drawn comparisons to the case of Khalif Browder, another Bronx teen who committed suicide in 2015 at the age of 22 after being held at Rikers for nearly 3 years without trial for a crime he did not commit. The Senate Thursday voted 51 to 47 along party lines to confirm Judge John K. Bush for a lifetime appointment to the 6th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. Bush has a long history of homophobic and sexist comments and has compared abortion to slavery. Bush has also used a pseudonym to post right-wing blog entries denying the science of climate change and repeating the false claims of so-called birthers who say President Obama was not born in the United States. The U.S. Treasury Department has fined ExxonMobil $2 million for violating U.S. sanctions against Russia 3 years ago when Secretary of State Rex Tillerson served as the oil company's CEO. The Treasury said ExxonMobil showed reckless disregard for U.S. law in 2014 when it signed contracts with Russian oil magnate Igor Sechin to develop offshore reserves in the Arctic. The move violated sanctions placed on Russia after it invaded Ukraine and annexed the Crimean Peninsula. Tillerson said at the time his company opposed Russia's sanctions, calling them ineffective. At the State Department Thursday, spokesperson Heather Nauert was asked whether Tillerson had changed his views on Russian sanctions.
This all predates his time here at the Department of State, and so I'm going to refrain from giving any comment on that at this time.
I understand this predates his time as Secretary of State, but now he is in a position in which he is part of the team that is supposed to enforce sanctions, not violate them or allow others to violate them. So I think it's relevant to know what he thinks about this
I will say
decision
this.
today.
The Secretary continues to abide by his ethical commitments, including that recusal from Exxon-related activities.
Secretary of State Tillerson is known to have close ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who awarded Tillerson the country's Order of Friendship Decoration in 2013. The Treasury Department's $2 million fine against ExxonMobil was the maximum amount allowed by law. It represents just over 2 hours' profit for the oil giant. In the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte has asked Congress to extend martial law on the southern island of Mindanao, where government forces have been battling ISIS-allied militants in the city of Marawi. The conflict has killed more than 500 people and displaced over 200,000 since fighting began in May. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., a congressional human rights panel heard testimony Thursday from activists who warn Filipino security forces and vigilantes have killed more than 7,000 suspected drug users and dealers since Duterte launched his so-called war on drugs last June. This is Elicer Carlos of the I Defend Human Rights Coalition.
Our daily documentation and monitoring work at the very affected communities confirm without a shadow of a doubt that President Duterte and other high officials of the land, having had defined a particular section of Philippine society worthy of elimination, have effectively put in place a de facto social cleansing policy whereby police and vigilantes are not only encouraged, but rewarded and forced to commit extrajudicial killings.
Congressman Jim McGovern, a Democrat from Massachusetts, said he was troubled by reports that President Duterte is planning to travel to Washington this fall for talks with President Trump.
A man with the human rights record of President Duterte should not be invited to the White House. And if he comes, I will lead the protest because, again, I mean, we ought to be on the side of advocating for human rights, not explaining them away.
In April, President Trump called Duterte and invited him to the White House. In the transcript of their conversation leaked by The Intercept, Trump said, quote, "I just wanted to congratulate you because I'm hearing of the unbelievable job on the drug problem," unquote. In Poland, thousands of protesters took to the streets of the capital, Warsaw, and other cities Thursday ahead of a vote scheduled today by the ruling Law and Justice Party on a bill that would let the Polish parliament appoint Supreme Court judges. Protesters say the measure would end the separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary.
Elections took place democratically, but their governing breaks the law, breaks the Constitution, so the democracy in Poland practically dies.
These new laws on the courts is definitely a step in the wrong direction. That is why we want the president to veto these bills.
That it was alarmed by the legislation is considering bringing unprecedented sanctions against one of its member states due to potential human rights abuses. In Morocco, riot police used clubs and tear gas to scatter hundreds of people marching through the streets of Al Hoceima Thursday as they defied a government ban on demonstrations to protest corruption and underdevelopment. The protests were the largest seen in Morocco since last October, when thousands turned out in cities across Morocco after the death of a fish seller who was crushed in a garbage truck while trying to retrieve fish confiscated by police. The death became the rallying point for a wider movement for economic justice and civil liberties in Morocco. In the Mediterranean, a strong earthquake rattled parts of Turkey and Greece in the early morning hours Friday, killing at least 2 people and injuring hundreds. The 6.5 magnitude quake was centered just south of the Turkish resort town of Bodrum. It collapsed nearby buildings and sparked a small tsunami that flooded coastal communities. President Trump is set to name coal industry lobbyist Jeff Homestead as second-in-command at the Environmental Protection Agency. Since 2007, Homestead has represented coal, railroad, and utility companies as a partner at the powerful firm Bracewell LLP on K Street in Washington, D.C. Homestead is also a former staffer to Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma, a prominent climate change denier. And in New York City, Haitian immigrant Jean Montreville walked free from a Manhattan federal building Thursday after ICE immigration officials ordered him to check in for a meeting that could have ended in his deportation. Jean Montreville came to the U.S. from Haiti with a green card in 1986 at the age of 17. Last month, when he went to his first check-in under President Trump, he was detained, handcuffed, processed to be deported until calls from his supporters apparently prompted his release. For a full interview with Jean Montreville, as well as his daughter and lawyer, you can go to democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.